If you gave it to people, they would hallucinate and tell you the truth, okay? So the CIA first used it as a truth serum, and it was given to what they referred to as enemies of the state. As Maddie said, people they want to either get information from or, what did you say? Confessions from on something like that. Thought it would tell the truth. But again, what happens? It's different in every single person. So it didn't work very well, but now it's in the United States. And people began to use it illegally, so to speak, although there was no law yet, until the Drug Abuse Control Amendment of 1965 was passed. So because of LSD's effects on its users, after it got into the United States, the drug was deemed illegal as a result of the Drug Abuse Control Amendment of 1965. When did he discover it? 1943. When did it become illegal? 1965. And it was kind of up to each state to ban it. So it's eventually going to be banned in all 50 states. And according to our lecture yesterday, guess what state was the last one to make it illegal? California. That's why these people had this love pageant rally, and they were rallying around the fact that they were going to make LSD illegal in California. It was the last state to ban the drug. Now, a very popular beverage that was used by the youth of America in the 1960s was called electric Kool-Aid. Did I put that on there? I did? Yeah, electric Kool-Aid. Guess what that was, Brady? It was two. Yeah, mixed drink of what, though?
I'm guessing
Go ahead.
alcohol.
No, not alcohol at all.
Is it LSD?
LSD and Kool-Aid. Yeah, it's called electric Kool-Aid. They would mix this liquid LSD with regular Kool-Aid and have a grand old time high on electric Kool-Aid. Now, can you imagine that LSD became popular? And sometimes when things become illegal, you'll drink more beer illegally than you might ever when you become 21. You might, I mean, who knows? But I mean, it's just that kind of thing, is it, you know, the game of being able to get away with it. Well, there were some really pretty influential people who became advocates of LSD. They liked it. People that were kind of influential, some big people. One of them was a chemist by the name of Augustus Owlsley. Augustus Owlsley was a guy that really became a big advocate of LSD. He was a chemist, pretty famous chemist, based in California. And because he was an advocate of the drug and he was a chemist, he manufactured and distributed millions of doses of LSD to people in the 1960s illegally. Well, both legally and illegally. Probably legally before 1965, right? And then 65 afterwards it was illegal. But Augustus Owlsley was a California-based chemist who manufactured and distributed several million doses of LSD during his lifetime. Another one was this fellow right here. Interesting dude. Oh, right here. Ken Kesey. Ken Kesey. And he was a famous novelist of the time, and he went around and promoted the use of LSD to anyone that would listen. Ken Kesey. You know what his most famous book is? Turned into a movie starring Jack Nicholson. There it is right here. First edition, first printing. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Have you ever heard that? Ever watched that movie? It's an interesting movie. It's about a guy that gets put into a mental institution that's not even crazy. But by the time they get done treating him, he is crazy, and he ends up performing a lobotomy on the guy and ruin his life. But it's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Ken Kesey was the author. Very famous novelist of the time. He promoted LSD like crazy and would promote it to anyone that would listen to him. Probably the most famous advocate of LSD in the 1960s was this guy right here, Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary, right below the Haight-Ashbury sign. Timothy Leary. And he was a psychologist who taught at both California, Berkeley, and Harvard University. He was a psychologist who was a professor at both University of California, Berkeley, and also taught at Harvard University. And he was probably the most public figure in the 1960s that promoted the use of LSD. Probably the most public figure in the 1960s that promoted the use of LSD. Tell you a little bit about him. Kind of an interesting dude. He was born in Massachusetts in 1920 and later attended West Point Military Academy. So he was born in Massachusetts in 1920 and later attended West Point Military Academy. And he served in the war, and which one? World War II. So he was a veteran, attended West Point Military Academy, served in the armed forces during World War II. After World War II ended, he earned his doctorate degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and began to teach psychology there. So after World War II, he earns his doctorate degree. From the University of California, Berkeley, and begins a teaching career teaching psychology at the university until moving on to teach at Harvard. Okay? Now that's where he got himself in trouble, was at Harvard. He did pretty good at University of California, Berkeley, but he got himself in trouble at Harvard because he started conducting legal psychological experiments with drugs during the time he taught there. Okay, at Harvard, he conducted legal psychological experiments with drugs. Now, since they were legal experiments, when did he get himself in trouble, Morgan? I actually had to fire a teacher for doing something kind of similar to this one time in my career. Where did he get himself in trouble if he was doing legal experiments during the time he taught at Harvard with drugs? They were legal, though. But what did he start doing? What? Well, he started using his students in class for his research, which means he was doing what? Giving them drugs, and then seeing what the effects of drugs were. And that happened in 1963. So at Harvard, he conducted legal psychological experiments with drugs. But in 1963, they fired him when they discovered that he was using students in his classes in his research. Yeah.
You said you had to fire someone?
Well, it wasn't exactly the same thing. I had a teacher that was not in the medical field, nor the PE field, nor in the science field one time, that decided to demonstrate to her students how you would take your blood sugar because the individual was diabetic. So she poked her finger and did the test and showed him, which was probably not the thing to do, but not fireable. Where did she get herself in trouble? When she started poking the fingers of her students and testing their blood sugar. And this was a time when what was prevalent in the discussion? AIDS. And protecting yourself from, I'm not kidding you. So we had a conversation that said, just kind of turn your stuff in and we'll see you in a different life. Okay? I wasn't real happy that she was, that had nothing to do with her curriculum, right? Because the teacher was teaching fine arts. Okay? But it was bad enough that you were spending your time doing that, teaching fine arts, but when you were using your kids, that's what happened to him. Okay? Basically. Okay? Now, after he was fired from Harvard, he became the most outspoken advocate of all hallucinogenic drugs, especially LSD. So he became a strong advocate and a very outspoken advocate of all hallucinogenic drugs, especially LSD. And he founded something called the League for Spiritual Discovery in upstate New York. So after he's fired from Harvard, he starts advocating for the use of LSD and all hallucinogenic drugs. And he starts an organization known as the League for Spiritual Discovery. And what was it really? It kind of. Most people go to these on Sunday. It was kind of a church. It was a religious group, kind of a church. He kind of set up his own church called the League for Spiritual Discovery, and he actually had a congregation of religious followers that came to it all the time. And if you ever go to church, everybody's church is different, but sometimes they'll pass the peace, and you shake hands. Hi, Patty, how you doing? Good to see you. Hey, nice to see you today, Pete. You ever do that in your church? You ever welcome everybody? Well, the passing of the peace in his church was the passing of marijuana joints. Here you go, Patty. You can give that to Pete when you're done. I mean, that's how it worked. And so he was a little off ball, okay? His congregation of religious followers passed marijuana joints as a symbol of peace during the church services. We're not taking communion today, we're just going to smoke a little marijuana, okay? Hey, after you give your collection today, pass the peace, okay? There you go, right? Well, as far as America's youth, this was his advice to America's youth. Okay? This was his advice to America's youth. Anybody want to guess what his advice was? Turn on, tune in, and drop out. He wouldn't have helped our graduation rate very good, I'll tell you that, guys. His philosophy to the American youth, and he preached it, was turn on, tune in, and drop out. Yeah, he was a professor. He basically spent the last 20 years of his life writing and lecturing across the United States and made some pretty good money. He became kind of a what? Novelty. Entrepreneur, but a novelty, right? People would pay him to come in. I mean, I'd pay him $500 if he'd come here if he was alive and talk to you guys about his experiences. I mean, could you not learn something from it? Not that, we're going to do it, but that'd be kind of cool. He went on a lecture circuit. Made a lot of money. Well, he finally died of prostate cancer on May 31st, 1996. Died of prostate cancer on May 31st, 1996. And you know what they did with his remains in February of 1997? By virtue of his will?
Did they cremate him?
No, that's a good guess, I guess.
That's what they did with Tupac, man.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Oh, no. They wouldn't put it. If he'd have thought of it, maybe he would have done it. No, they cremated him and shot his remains into space. Had his remains shot into space. Yeah, had his remains shot into space. Timothy Leary, this guy right here in later life, one of the toughest autographs you'll ever get. He signed that one on April 1st of 1979. Get on eBay and find out what one of his signatures are worth. They're not cheap. Timothy Leary. All right, moving on. Another example. We've got 6 so far, right? Okay. 7th one was the rise of motorcycle gangs. This will be the last one we talk about today, and then we'll have some more tomorrow or Monday. The rise of motorcycle gangs led to violence in the 1960s. The rise of motorcycle gangs. Does anybody know when motorcycles became popular in the United States? Yeah, I would say that's fairly correct, but early 50s. What? Yes, after World War II, because we had a lot of surplus motorcycles left over from the war. They used them in the war. So after World War II, beginning about 1945, the ownership and use of motorcycles sprang up all across the United States because of the surplus of military motorcycles that were sold after the war very, very cheap. Almost gave them away. They guessed that by the end of, prior to the end of World War II, there were probably a couple 100,000 motorcycles in the United States. Prior to the end of World War II, probably 200,000 motorcycles in the United States. A year after the war, more than 1 million were cruising the roads of America. So you can see the difference. So about 200,000 people had motorcycles prior to World War II, over 1 million after World War II because they were so available after the war. Now, I had a Harley-Davidson for a while, and I sold it for this reason we're going to kind of talk about. When I was in Montana, I had a lot of buddies. A lot of us had Harley-Davidsons. So what did we do? What? We got together as a group and rode around. Went to Yellowstone Park, went on rides. Every weekend we went somewhere, okay? So I get here, and I have this motorcycle, and I don't know anybody that much, and so about the first 3 or 4 years...
Students and staff, pardon the interruption. With regard to our security status right now, just wanted to clear a couple of things up. The person in Thermopolis was not apprehended. He is still at large. But we do feel that it's okay for us to go to lunch and have a regular lunch and everything, so kids can leave when the bell rings. And when we get back into class for 5th period, we'll still be running locked doors on the outside and everything, and but we'll still be running bell schedules and everything like that. So that being said, you can go to lunch when the bell rings. Thanks.
So anyway, when I moved here the first 3 years, I didn't know anybody, so my motorcycle, I think I drove it like 30 miles one year, and then one year I drove it with Dale Bush, if you remember who Dale Bush was, and I went to Sturgis and back, not during the Sturgis season. I drove it about 1,200 miles in about a week, and I just never did use it, so I sold it, okay? But I used to get together in these groups. Well, these groups got together, and they rode, had fun, companionship, and once in a while they'd raise a little harmless hell on occasion, okay? I can't say that, I was with my buddies, we weren't thinking we were pretty neat, in our do-rags and going around looking cool, listening to music. So, we raised a little harmless hell, nothing. I'll tell you one thing I never did do is drink alcohol and ride my motorcycle. It's hard enough to watch everybody else because it's a defensive thing. It's hard enough. I can't get all these guys to stop at 6 different bars and drink 4 or 5 beers and get on their motorcycle because you got to be paying attention. I mean, people will kill you, run over you. Well, anyway, some of these groups got a little crazy, and they were doing things not seen as very positive, and people started pointing their fingers at Pete DeZanis and his motorcycle group. Quit doing those bad things, you're giving us all a bad name. And the one that was really upset about it was the American Motorcycle Club. And they sponsored a hill climb in Hollister, California in 1947. So the American Motorcycle Club was sponsoring a hill climb in Hollister, California in 1947, and thousands of people came, man. They came and went for this hill climb. And a percentage of them were doing what, Sage? They were causing havoc through the community, and when the thing got over, there were a lot of negative reviews. And the spokesman for the American Motorcycle Club said, hey, don't judge my organization by the actions of a few that come here and raise Cain. You got to remember, about only 1% of the group probably were raising this heck. So doggone it, don't blame the American Motorcycle Club. You got to worry about that 1% of the group that couldn't represent us in a positive manner. Well, this 1% of the group pretty soon became very proud of their recognition, and they started wearing patches on their colors or their vests that said 1%er. So these head spokesman for the American Motorcycle Club, don't, by God, get after us. Let's not do that. It's only 1% of those people that got themselves in trouble. They're the ones you ought to be worried about. Well, this 1% became very proud of their recognition and began wearing patches on their vests or colors that said 1%er. Now, these 1%ers split up into another little group, and they were a little hardcore. Matter of fact, they were pretty hardcore, and they gave themselves a new name, the Pissed Off Bastards. I'm not making this up. So a group breaks off from this 1%ers, right? And they're so proud that they're more badass than the other 1%ers that they form their own group, and they call themselves the Pissed Off Bastards. Not making this up. Which eventually become the Hells Angels. There you go. And the head of the Hells Angels is that fine fellow up there left of Harry Truman, Sonny Barger. And that's the do-rag man next to him in Sturgis. That guy right there is the head of the Hells Angels motorcycle group. And I'll finish with another story as we'll move off this You know where the Hells Angels were first formed? Anybody know what city? 1954 is when they became the Hells Angels. And Sonny Barger, that fellow up there, formed them in Oakland, California. So you want to hear the Sonny Barger story? Why I have a picture up there? Does that interest you?
Yeah.
Right here, it's right there. You didn't sign. Anyway, so I'm teaching this class in Roberts, Montana, and I got a kid named Brent Waller. And Brent is a great kid, and he wants to do his report on the Hells Angels after I give this lecture, because we got a report that's due. Well, where are you going to get any information? So in those days, I just called information for Cave Creek, Arizona, where I knew Sonny Barger lived, and I said, could I have the number of Sonny Barger? Nobody had cell phones then, Matty. Everybody had a landline. So the lady says, and the number is da-da-da-da-da-da. So I write it down and I call him. And the phone rings, this lady answers, and I'm a little bit going, whoa. And I said, is Sonny there? She says, yes, I'll get him, just a minute. He gets on the phone. I said, is this Sonny Barger? He goes, yeah. I said, well, I'm Randy Durham, I'm a history teacher over in Roberts, Montana. Oh, nice to talk to you. This guy's head of the Hells Angels, right? And I said, well, I got a young man here who wants to do a report on the Hells Angels. I was wondering if there's any way you could maybe he could have a short interview with you sometime. Yeah, how about tomorrow? So Brent comes in the office and interviews this guy for like 45 minutes and writes the paper of the century. And this kid was not a great student, but he's a great kid. Anyway, a few years later I go to Sturgis and there's these signs up, rumors, Sonny Barger's here. The Hells Angels had set up a shop to sell patches like this. Well, in the back, you can imagine what they're selling, not patches, probably guns and drugs, I don't know. Anyway, so I walk in there with my wife, and if you know my wife at all, she's not overly aggressive. And I said, is Sonny Barger here? And this guy all dressed up in his color says, who the hell's asking? And I said, well, my name's Randy Durham, I'm a teacher in Montana. And if Sonny's here, and if you told him I was here, I think he'd see me. Hoping he wouldn't